For boys, imagination, and mountain rangers, what growing up in Pulaski County was like. By Eugene Mathena. It was early Saturday morning in the small town of Dublin, nestled at the foot of the Appalachian Mountains in southwest Virginia. The air was crisp, the fog still hanging low among the trees, and the sun just beginning to peek over the hills. For boys, not even teenagers, but full of adventure, met in their secret clubhouse, a ramshackle old barn behind LJ's house. They called themselves the Mountain Rangers, a club dedicated to exploring the woods and uncovering the mysteries of the mountains. LJ, the leader of the group, was full of ideas and had gathered his three best friends for their latest adventure. Eugene, tall and quiet, was the cautious one, always thinking ahead. Terry, the joker, loved to act tough but was also the fastest on his feet. David, the smallest of the group, had the sharpest eyes and could spot a deer from miles away. "We're going on an expedition today," LJ announced with excitement. "Not just to see the forest like before. Today, we imagine seeing the creatures that roamed these mountains long ago, the ones that no one sees anymore." The other boys nodded in agreement. They knew the stories of the great eastern elk, the fierce eastern cougar, and the mighty red wolf. They had read about them in books and heard stories from their grandparents. But those creatures were long gone. Still, the thought of seeing them, even in their imaginations, thrilled the boys. They set off, hiking along a narrow trail that wound through the woods. The trees were tall and ancient, their branches reaching out like the arms of giants. The boys moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the fallen leaves. Eugene, as usual, led with a cautious pace, while Terry joked about facing down a bison and then laughed at himself, his voice echoing through the trees. As they ventured deeper into the forest, LJ stopped suddenly and pointed to a clearing ahead. "Look," he whispered, his eyes wide. The boys squinted, following his gaze. In their imaginations, they saw it, a majestic eastern elk, tall and regal, standing in the clearing. Its massive antlers looked like they could touch the sky. The elk was grazing peacefully, oblivious to the boys watching from behind a thicket of trees. "Wow," David whispered. "Imagine if they were still here. Used to roam these mountains by the thousands," LJ said, his voice barely audible. "But they've been gone for over 100 years." They stood quietly for a few moments, lost in the vision of the elk, before moving on. As they walked deeper into the woods, the terrain became steeper, the trees denser. They passed towering oaks and ancient hemlocks, their roots twisting across the forest floor like the veins of the earth itself. Suddenly, Terry froze. "Did you hear that?" The boys listened carefully. There was a faint rustling in the underbrush. Eugene raised his hand, signaling for silence. A moment later, the sound of paws on dry leaves became clearer. Emerging from the bushes was a sleek, tawny figure, small but powerful. A bobcat, its tufted ears twitching, stepped into view. It glanced at the boys, its golden eyes sharp and intelligent. For a second, the air was thick with tension, but the boys didn't panic. They remembered the rule: stay calm and let the wild be wild. The bobcat sniffed the air, then darted away as quickly as it had appeared. The boys exhaled, sharing silent grins. "Imagine if that had been an eastern cougar," LJ said, grinning as his imagination took hold again. "Back in the old days, these mountains had cats bigger than any bobcat, strong enough to take down a deer." They were fast too, David added. I read they could outrun most anything in the woods. Too bad they're extinct, Eugene said. But that bobcat was close enough for me. As they continued their journey, they reached a rocky outcrop with a view of the valley below. The scene was breathtaking, endless waves of green, broken only by patches of farmland far in the distance. LJ led the boys to the edge, where they sat and ate sandwiches from their backpacks, talking quietly about the animals they had imagined seeing. Terry was the first to stand up, stretching his arms wide. "What do you think we'd do if we ran into a pack of red wolves?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. LJ chuckled. "They'd have to find us first. Besides, they've been gone from these parts since the 1950s. But if we saw one, we'd just have to respect them. They only hunted to survive, after all." Suddenly, David stood up, squinting into the distance. "Guys, look down there." The boys followed his gaze and saw movement in the shadows of the trees below. It was subtle at first, but then they spotted the unmistakable shape of a black bear. The bear lumbered through the underbrush, seemingly unaware of the boys high above. "That's no imagination," LJ whispered. "That's real." The bear, powerful and calm, sniffed at the ground before lumbering away deeper into the forest. The boys watched it go, their hearts racing but not out of fear. There was a strange sense of awe and respect among them. "That was amazing," Eugene finally said, breaking the silence. "We really saw a black bear." "And we didn't panic," Terry added, puffing out his chest. They continued their hike, now more aware of the forest life around them. Every rustle in the leaves made them pause. Every bird call was a reminder that this wild land had its own rhythm, one that had been there for centuries. As the sun began to set, the boys made their way back to town, the adventure fresh in their minds. They had imagined seeing the great animals of the past, the elk, the cougar, the bison, but had also encountered the wild creatures of today. They never acted scared, even when they spotted the bear. Instead, they used their instincts and respected the wild, just like they had promised each other when they formed the mountain rangers. As they walked home, the air cooling around them, LJ turned to his friends. "We'll come back next weekend, right?" The boys nodded eagerly. "Who knows?" David said, glancing back at the forest. "Maybe next time we'll see something even bigger." The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor as the boys made their way back down the trail. Their legs were tired, but their spirits were high after a day full of adventure. They had imagined the extinct creatures of the past and had real-life encounters with a bobcat and even a black bear. The Appalachian Mountains had given them more than they could have hoped for. But the day wasn't over yet. As they approached a narrow part of the trail, flanked by thick brush and towering pines, Terry suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. "Hey, you guys hear that?" he whispered. The others came to a halt, listening closely. The forest had been alive with sounds all day: bird calls, the rustling of leaves, the creaking of old trees. But now it was different. There was something else. A low, rhythmic sound, like heavy footsteps, echoed in the distance. It was slow but deliberate, like something big was moving through the woods. Eugene, ever the cautious one, furrowed his brow. "That's too heavy to be a deer or a bear." LJ glanced around, his eyes scanning the thick trees. "Let's stay calm. It's probably nothing," he said, though his voice carried a tinge of curiosity. The boys moved carefully, keeping their eyes sharp, instincts honed. David, the sharp-eyed observer, squinted into the distance. Look there. He pointed ahead, his voice barely a whisper. Something's moving, but it's walking on two legs. The boy's eyes followed David's finger, and there it was. A massive, shadowy figure, too tall to be a person, too upright to be any of the animals they had read about. The figure moved smoothly through the undergrowth, its enormous frame weaving in and out of the trees as if it belonged there, almost blending into the darkening woods. Terry's eyes were wide, but not in fear. Is that Bigfoot? He breathed, almost in awe. For a few moments, the boys were frozen in place, watching as the creature moved deeper into the forest, its outline just barely visible between the thick trunks. It was covered in dark hair, tall and broad-shouldered. They could see it clearly now, much larger than any man, its arms swinging as it walked effortlessly through the rugged terrain. LJ, ever the leader, took a step forward, motioning for the others to follow quietly. They moved cautiously, their footsteps barely a whisper on the forest floor, hearts pounding but not from fear, more from the sheer thrill of the moment. As they got closer, they could hear the creature more clearly, the crunch of twigs underfoot, the deep, steady breathing. It was real, right in front of them. David, who was usually the quiet one, whispered, "I didn't think we'd actually see it. Not like this." None of them did. They had heard stories, of course, tales passed down from local hunters and old-timers about a creature that roamed these woods, watching but never being seen. But now, here it was, a living, breathing mystery, walking just ahead of them. Then, as if sensing their presence, the creature stopped. It turned its massive head slightly to the side, its broad shoulders silhouetted against the fading light. The boys held their breath, rooted to the spot, as they stared at the figure. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The forest went quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of their own breathing. The creature stood there, still and silent, as if it was deciding what to do. LJ's mind raced, but he remembered what his grandfather had always said about the wild. Respect it, and it will respect you. Without thinking, he raised his hand slowly, a small gesture of peace. The figure, as if acknowledging the silent truce, made no aggressive move. It simply turned away and, with a few powerful strides, disappeared deeper into the forest, vanishing into the shadowy depths as though it had never been there. The boys stood in stunned silence for what felt like hours, but was only a minute. It was Terry who finally broke the stillness, his voice soft but full of excitement. "That was Bigfoot. I mean, we actually saw Bigfoot." Eugene nodded, his usual cautious demeanor replaced with a wide-eyed grin. "I can't believe it. We saw Bigfoot." David, still scanning the forest where the creature had vanished, whispered, "And it saw us." LJ, ever the leader, let out a slow breath and smiled. "This is going to be the best story we ever tell." The boys stood there for a while longer, the weight of the moment settling in. They had imagined extinct animals and encountered real ones, but nothing could have prepared them for this. Bigfoot, legend, mystery, and now a memory they would carry with them forever. As the last light of the day faded, they finally turned and began the walk home, their footsteps lighter, their hearts full of excitement. The forest around them seemed different now, more alive with possibilities. And they knew they would return, not just to imagine the creatures of the past, but to see what other mysteries the mountains had yet to reveal. The mountain rangers had faced the wild that day and walked away with a story no one would believe, but they didn't care. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. And with that, the mountain rangers headed home, ready for whatever adventure the mountains would bring them next. Based partly on stories when growing up as a boy. Though the names are the same, some licenses have been taken for story purposes. It still resonates how we were as boys and how our imaginations were a key part when we were at play in Pulaski County, Virginia in the late 1970s to early 1980s, something I feel has been lost with today's generation.